I have a confession, and I feel like this is a safe space, so I'm just going to out and say it. I'm bored of knitting podcasts. I'm bored of watching them. I'm bored of making them. I'm just bored. And this isn't all knitting podcasts, but this is most knitting podcasts. I think when I first started my knitting journey, I was very interested in the video format of a knitting podcast. And if you're not familiar, a knitting or crochet or fiber podcast is a video series where the maker sits down and they share what they've been working on lately. The segments typically include finished objects, works in progress, and any acquisitions and future project plans. The frequency of these videos and the length of the videos can vary pretty drastically between creators, but the overall gist of the video is pretty much the same. It's kind of like a show and tell of here's all of the things that I've been working on lately. And I think those videos have a place. From the perspective of a viewer, it's nice to have something low-key, casual to sort of put on in the background. But I can also see the appeal from the maker's perspective as somebody who is creating the content, because knitting podcasts, in my experience, they are pretty low-hanging fruit, low effort, low editing, not a lot of preparation involved. I mean, you can make it more complicated and more involved, but for the most part, you just sit down and it's a stream of consciousness of what you've been working on lately. And I do enjoy that to an extent, but I feel like lately I found myself wanting a little bit more out of my KnitTube experience, so to speak. And that's not to say that I hate knitting podcasts or I don't watch them. I do watch them. I have my favorites. And usually I appreciate a knitting podcast that is less than 30 minutes long and that is not every single week, because I can't tell you how many times I clicked a knitting podcast and there's someone who publishes every week at least an hour and a half, and they have the same 5 whips that they've had for the last 3 episodes. It's like, well, how do you have enough content for a feature length film? It's totally beyond me. But people eat it up, and I love that for them. And I think for the makers who create knitting podcasts, I usually will tune in every few months just to see what they're up to. But I'm not a consistent knitting podcast watcher like I used to be a few years ago. And I don't really know why that is. I think in the beginning of my knitting journey, I was still learning so much, and every new designer I heard about, every new knitting YouTuber I discovered, it was just like it opened up my knitting world just a little bit more, and I found that really exciting. But I think I have reached a point of diminishing returns where it's just like the more I see, the more themes I notice, the more I realize a lot of people are talking about the same types of things, they're making the same types of videos, and I get burnt out about seeing the same thing all the time. I've talked about this with seeing whatiknit designs everywhere. I feel the same way about knitting podcasts. But I think we can all agree that they're not necessarily going anywhere, and nor do I want them to. But I also think many of you would agree that it's worth exploring what other types of knitting related content is out there. You might find yourself wanting a little bit more variety in the content that you consume, but have it still be related to this craft that you love so much. And over the years, I have found a number of channels, a number of makers here on YouTube who share their knitting, oftentimes in the form of a knitting podcast, but have other things that I find even more entertaining and engaging. Things like knitting vlogs, things like project specific deep dive videos that aren't just here's what I finished, here's what I'm working on, and here's what I bought. They branch out a little bit more, and I always appreciate that. So I'm going to share a handful of creators here on YouTube that I really enjoy watching for that reason. First channel I'll recommend is dadaknit. She is a Korean maker as far as I can tell. All of her videos are in Korean, but many of her videos are sort of music only process vlogs. Maybe she takes you through a week of her knitting life or In most cases, it's project specific. So she covers a project that she made, from getting the yarn to binding off and blocking and trying on. And throughout the process, there's pleasant music playing, and she puts text on screen that sort of shares her thoughts and feelings about the project and the yarn as she's going through it. Many of her videos have translated captions through YouTube, so I usually turn that on when I watch her videos so I can know what she's saying on the screen. And I often come to her videos when I'm working on something fairly simple, so stockinette that I can thankfully knit without looking, so I can put my eyes on the video, read what she's putting on screen, and take in the sights and visual things that she's sharing in the video. And I find it really interesting because oftentimes she'll share like a pastry that she's eating at the coffee shop she's knitting at, or, a walk through the park. She shares the process in a way that makes you feel like you are experiencing it with her. She truly brings you along on the process, and you feel like you've invested in it and you are tuned in to how it turns out. And I appreciate process vlogs for that reason. I enjoy making them for the same reason, even though they are a lot of work. They're not my favorite to edit, but I tend to get the most out of them, both from a viewer and as a creator. So I really appreciate the format of her videos. The next channel I would recommend is Lisamakes. Lisa is a Canadian expat living in Spain, I believe. And she's been in the game for a while. I think her videos go back like 8 years. I've watched her content since the very beginning of my YouTube journey, and I appreciate that she is multi-craftual. So she sews and she knits. I don't know if she spins or weaves or anything like that, but most of her content is centered around sewing and knitting. She does a podcast format that she recently started calling Hey Knitters. I do like her actual podcast videos because they're pretty short and sweet and very concise, and I always appreciate that. And she works on some pretty interesting projects. She's a very experienced maker, so I always love to see the types of projects that more seasoned knitters are making. She did some content recently where she shares information about knitting she will thrift a sweater and unravel the wool from that sweater and reknit it into a new project. And she shares her way about doing that, and very informational and entertaining. It's something I've considered doing with some of the older store-bought sweaters in my wardrobe, but I have not quite gotten brave enough to explore that adventure. But if and when I do, I'll probably refer back to her videos because they were very interesting to watch. And the next channel I'll recommend is Escarla. That's the name of her channel, and that's also her name, Escarla. She has not been making videos for super long, but her videos are always very well edited and entertaining, good quality visuals, good quality audio, which I can always appreciate. I'm always trying to find ways to sort of step up the quality of my own videos, and I find hers very inspiring. I really, really love her project vlogs. She'll do like spend a weekend with me, a knitting weekend, or how much I can knit in a week, things like that, where it is, I think, a pretty balanced mix of her sitting down, talking to the camera about what has been going on, but also nice soothing music and visuals of her going about working on her projects or going through her day. And I think there's something about a well-edited knitting vlog that just, I eat it up every time. Every time Escarla posts, whether it's a knitting vlog, she also has a podcast series. I love watching her videos, even the podcasts. I don't find them boring at all. And I think, again, because they're short, I've noticed this pattern, like the podcast that I sort of tune into every single time somebody uploads are the podcasts that are like less than 30 minutes. Maybe I just don't have the attention span, but how much can you say about a handful of projects? I don't know. Anyway, I love what she's doing on YouTube. She recently had a baby, and I am so impressed that she has shown up in any capacity on her channel since having her baby. But you can tell that making content is something she's pretty passionate about and invested in. So it, to me, seems very important to her to continue to create. And I really respect that. And I think I'm going to be supporting her for as long as she's around and sharing content. But yeah, Escarla's channel is really, really cool. The next channel I'll recommend is Brookwillow. Her name is Anna. I've been watching her from the beginning of her channel since she started sharing her knitting and making on YouTube. She knits, she sews, and she weaves. I'm not sure she crochets. I don't recall seeing crochet projects from her, but it wouldn't surprise me if she does crochet. She is multi-craftual, multi-talented, and I really enjoy her passion for making. I love how much she loves making. And I always admire the people who are really dabbling in all of the fiber crafts, not just knitting. I feel like my hobby kind of starts and ends with knitting and crochet, and I don't really have a huge appetite to branch out personally, at least not yet. I just feel like I don't have the space, I don't have the time and the attention span that would take up from me. And I feel like, of course, naturally engaging in so many hobbies is going to take away time from engaging in the hobbies that I already have. So I feel like I have to be very discerning about how I spend my time. Anyway, I live vicariously through makers like Anna of Brookwillow or Escarla, who also spins and sews. It's just really entertaining to watch them share their projects. So Anna, she does a knitting podcast or a knitting podcast-y videos where she kind of shows what she's been working on recently, but she also has process vlogs and other formats of videos that are very focused on what she's been making, but the format changes. She recently did a silent vlog where she visually showed the things that she was working on and she sort of narrated on screen with text. She does process vlogs. She also shares little snippets of other things that are important to her that are maybe not necessarily crafts. So she loves being outdoors. She talks about that quite often, and in her adventures, maybe during camping or hiking outings, she'll share some really beautiful footage from those outings that I think just adds another layer of interest to her videos. So I always find her videos very interesting to watch. She has such a soothing, calming voice and presence. So I really enjoy her content. She's another one. Her audio is always great quality. Her video is always great quality. And I aspire. I'm not there yet, but me and this $600 camera is just going to have to make it work, okay? That's all I have to give. Next up, I will recommend To The Knit Point. So her channel is very unique because she only does process vlogs and these videos that she calls knit time-lapse videos, where she is really just taking you from start to finish of making a project. I think something that's really interesting about the videos that she makes is that she is not following patterns. She is freestyling, self-drafting, pretty much every project that I've seen her share on the channel. And she also shares the ins and outs, the ups and downs, right? So when you're self-drafting or when you're making up something as you go, you may have a general plan, but oftentimes it doesn't work out the way you envisioned on the first try. So there are lots of instances where she gets so far and she rips it out because it's not turning out the way she wants it to. And I think a lot of people may consider it perfectionism or being too critical, but I think she's very committed to her vision and she's willing to rip out and start over to bring that vision to light. And I totally respect that. And I think if I was self-drafting things more frequently, I would probably have that as well. But I'm spoiled. I like to read a pattern and do what it tells me to do and modify from there. Some of her videos have her voicing over the details of the project as she's sharing the footage. Other videos, there's just text on screen. But every single one of them I find really, really interesting just to see her process. And a lot of times the outcome of her project are really, really wonderful. I would also recommend melmakesstuff. Melmakesstuff has been making videos for quite some time. She doesn't upload super frequently, but when she does, I am locked in. Okay. I really love her project diary videos. She hasn't made them very recently, but that was the first sort of project vlog style video that I had ever seen. And I oftentimes go back and rewatch many of her videos because I find them super interesting. She's been knitting for a long time. She also spins, I believe, and I know for a fact that she sews as well. And she shares about all of the crafts that she's interested in on her channel. I especially love her project vlogs. She does have a bit of a podcast format video series as well, where she shares what she's been working on lately. But I really appreciate that a lot of her projects are very unique. I believe she knits from a lot of like Japanese books, or other books that are maybe not as readily available. So she knits some really unique projects. She's also very familiar with her own measurements and the way she likes her clothes to fit. So oftentimes she will modify a knitting or sewing pattern to fit her body. She's always talking about she has broad shoulders and shorter arms. So drop shoulders require special consideration, and depending on the construction of the sweater will dictate how she approaches it, and oftentimes she will modify it to get the fit that she wants. And I think it's very informative, and not in such a way that she's saying this is what you need to do, but more so in a way, this is what I do to make things work for me. And I find that very informative and engaging. What I will say is a lot of the projects she makes are not projects I personally have a desire to make, which I think speaks to how interesting her content is all the more, because even though I won't make the things that she's talking about, I am absolutely tuned into whatever she's saying. I want to hear it. And then there is Abby of whatiknit. I've been watching Abby for a while. The way she speaks about her projects, I find really interesting. She does have a traditional knitting podcast, but she also does process vlogs where she focuses on one project from start to finish. She recently did a video all about her Traveler hoodie by Andrea Mowry that she knit with her own hand spun yarn. And I just found that super interesting, and that project turned out so beautifully. That is the most tempted I've ever been to learn. Very tempting indeed. But yeah, I just find Abby really refreshing. Her videos are short and concise, even her knitting podcast videos. And she's always sharing really thoughtful insights about the projects that she makes. You can tell that she is very deliberate about the things that she makes. And she also doesn't do a lot of mainstream patterns. She knits from a lot of smaller designers, lesser known designers, knitting books. She's also a spinner, as I mentioned, and she's always, I feel like, sharing books that she's read, both related to her crafts that she's interested in, but also fiction books and other, casual books that she reads that are not related to knitting. And I just find her very entertaining. Then there's Jinyierknits. I'm probably mispronouncing that. I believe she is based in China. She pretty much exclusively does process vlogs, silent, with narration on screen and Chinese text, but you can use the Google closed caption feature to have translations on screen. I really enjoy her content. She's another one who sort of brings you along the process with her. One of my favorite aspects of her videos is that she really spends time setting the scene. So she's going to sit down and knit. She shares footage of her making a snack that she's going to eat while she's knitting, or making a latte or a cup of tea. She's setting it down on the table. She's pulling her project out of the bag, setting it on the table, and then she is getting ready to knit. And then the music starts, and it's like, okay, we're in this together. Yes. I just find her format of videos very refreshing. She makes some beautiful projects. And yeah, I would definitely recommend her content. I hope you've enjoyed these channel recommendations. If you are looking for something outside of the traditional podcast, I hope the channels I shared are of interest to you. And if there are other channels that you have been enjoying lately, please leave them in the comments below so we can all branch out and see what else is out there in the KnitTube world. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.